Hey folks, we are going to keep cruising along. You have to be somewhat brisk when you're finishing up pots because they start drying and you just have to chase them. So here is a bowl, right? I am going to fill up my syringe here and do a little bit of slip work on this so that later on I will be able to do some sgraffito on this pot. And I definitely want you guys to be practicing your sgraffito. So this is somewhat centered on the wheel. I'm just pushing that ear syringe into my brush and working my way up to the rim. This is going to be a very brushy application. I might go right over the rim just to give some contrast to the exterior. And you guys know by now that if you wanted a application that was smoother, you could pour or dip. But I wanted to give this some pretty high texture since it's a pretty basic form. I want to give it some sort of an, interesting surface. So you can sort of vary your speed and play with the slip a little bit, which is really kind of nice, actually. Here's what this looks like inside. And then I sort of went over the edge here. So I'm just going to clean it up on the outside. Good. Nice and quick. This pot, this trimmed pot was very wet. After I trimmed it, I could squeeze the rim and it would distort on me, but now it seems a lot more set up. One problem, if you put slip onto a very wet pot, the additional moisture of the slip can just cause the pot to fall apart. So you want to give the pot a chance to dry. That's kind of cool. I wonder if you can see that. So that's super drippy. Might be a little too drippy. So let me go back in. Now the slip will, it will appear when you apply it to be very opaque, but when you get a glaze over the slip, the glaze does eat into the slip a little bit. So you want to put it on, if you want an opaque surface, put it on pretty thickly. And then the last will be a quick pour it in. Spin it around. And this will be a super opaque surface here. Give it a little shake. Sponge off the rim. You're good to go. Okay, so this pot also, this morning, I would say at about, 10 o'clock this morning, this pot was too wet to trim. When I squeezed the rim it really distorted. Now the rim is nicely set up and I can trim this pot that I altered just a little bit. So I'm going to put this slip away. I always want to use it and then cover it up, because with this material, if it gets too dry, it doesn't work, and you have to go back and you have to reconstitute it. It's a whole lot of work and it's just no fun. So I'm going to clean the rim of this bucket so that the lid can fit on tightly, and then put the lid on, right, and keep this brush that has slip on it already right with the pot, with the pot of slip. All right, so we're going to trim this bowl, and hopefully we'll get around to making one more cup that will be a 1 pound cup. Okay, so I'm going to trim this bowl, I'm going to wet the wheel head, clean it off, but before I put it upside down where I can't see the inside anymore, I'm going to really look at this pot right down the rim, just to see where it starts to get a little bit thick. And it seems to be about right there. I wonder if you can see that mark I just made there. And then what would be a good sized foot? I don't know, I keep getting a good peace sign sized foot. Then we want to get it as centered as an off-centered altered pot can be. 3 plugs of clay. These can be a little difficult to keep on the wheel because I don't know if you can tell, but the rim is lifted and not in contact with the wheel head. So hopefully this will stay on the wheel head with the 3 plugs. And I have my marks and I have my tools. Here is one mark that I'm going to trim to for the foot, and here's the other mark for where the pot got a little heavy up the wall. So, you know, in the ceramic studio, which can be a little different from other studios, your material is, glass is similar to this. I would say looms are similar to this, but your material is always changing on you. So when you come to the studio, you find yourself responding, you know, to what you're finding there. And in the course of one work period, you may be throwing because you're waiting for some pots to dry. You may be trimming and applying slip. If nothing is ready for you to work on, you can always draw or wedge clay or do, you know, a little maintenance on the studio. We talked about, you can see here as I'm trimming, there's a lot of clay that's hitting the floor. So it's always appreciated when students come in, put a little bit of sweeping compound down on the floor and, you know, very gently so as not to raise a lot of dust, sweep the studio, clean the sink, do anything that makes work time a little bit easier for everyone else. All right, so I'm pushing here and I can feel this clay give on me. So I have gone far enough. Here I'm going to level this spot where the foot will hit the tabletop and then make a groove for the thickness of this foot. Now I'm making that groove because I have all this clay in here to get rid of, and sometimes as you're doing it, your tool can slide and cut the foot right off the pot. So this little moat here helps to keep the tool where it's supposed to be. So I'm noticing here that this clay is very soft as I'm trimming it. So the rim was quite dry, but this clay is very soft. So I can do a certain amount of trimming now, but I may actually have to set this pot aside and come back to it and trim some more later, because it's too wet and it will distort if I try to get it too thin. But I will want to come back and get it another bit thinner. And I bet you guys can, when I stop the wheel, you'll see how wet this clay is. Okay, so that's about it for now. And you know, you have to get used to, sometimes you come in and you're all ready and you have time to actually do something. But sometimes the clay just is not ready for you. So you have to just wait until the clay dries a little more. So you can see how wet these trimmings are. And you can definitely see how wet this clay is. So we're halfway there, I would say, but I will set this one aside. And then I would not put slip on this pot yet because it's so wet that it could just, down in here, you know, at the bottom of the pot it's so wet, it could just cause this pot to fall apart. So I'm just going to throw one more cup, just so you can get a sense of different weights and sizes. Here is a 1.5 pound, here is a 1.25 pound, and now we're going to do a 1 pound cup. So I did just finish trimming, and this bat is not sitting properly. This might seem a little bit boring to you, but it's just sort of part and parcel. Sometimes you'll put a bat on the wheel head and it'll just not be sitting properly. So rather than going forward and making a piece, it's sort of like when your pot's too dry, you can't trim it. Here, if the bat isn't level on the pot, you will not throw a good pot, okay? So that's an important little moment. Here is our clay from trimming. We're done with our trimming, so I'm going to gather this clay together, and this is really important too. Rather than putting these trimmings into my recycle bucket, which is another rather laborious process, recycling clay, I'm going to just gather up all this clay, dip it in water, and work some of this water back into the clay. So I can actually, I mean, this is enough to make something out of. So it will save me a lot of work and time if I can go and recycle the clay right as I'm using it and make something out of it. This is also great for hand strength. If you guys play instruments, musical instruments, you know, working your finger and palm foam and carpal tunnel strength is very, very important. So just this clay now feels really good, where a minute ago it was really kind of mixed up and hard and soft. And I'm just doing a little, this is kind of a form of wedging where you just roll a coil. And I'm going to put this back in the bag. And then, this is quite essential. There is a lot of clay on the floor here from my trimming. So I'm just going to come around, scrape it up off the floor, get it all together. This is why they pay me the big bucks. And any clay, I'd say the rule is, any clay that hits the floor, you should just throw it out, because we don't want to contaminate the clay we're using. But we do want to keep the floor super clean. Okay. So, 1 pound cup. Here we go. This I think I'm going to title this film Maintenance. So my trimming tools go away. Get rid of this last little bit of dry clay, put it in this bucket so I can recycle it. Here are my trimming tools, or throwing tools, and here we go. So I won't say much here. Why don't I just throw, and you guys in your heads just sort of watch and analyze what I'm doing. By now, it should start to be somewhat automatic, the throwing. And what it is you are building brain synapses, neural pathways, and body memory in how to make pots. That's 3. About 1/4 of an inch, that's good. Oops. After each pull, I'm definitely going to compress that rim. Having a little bump down here, so I'll use my knuckle, which is a lot stronger than the tip of my finger. Always compress that rim. I think I'll need to do one more pull. Try to keep it at 3. And this is, I can feel this is a smaller amount of clay. And so it can be a little bit trickier. You'd think it would be easier to use a small amount, but just to get your hand in there and to get a reasonable amount of volume can be difficult with a smaller amount of clay. And here's my last pull, I promise. So I'm really, here I'm just sticking with one size of a cup. The reason for that is that you rarely, I think, get a form, rarely can understand a form with just one, throwing session. Sometimes it takes making a dozen or 2 dozen or 50 cups before you really can settle into the routine and the rhythm and the movement that you need to make to get the pot the way you want it to be. And I'm finding that with this one actually, I'm sort of understanding this form a little bit better after throwing it, and I've only made, 4. But you do gain quite a bit from each pot. Quite a bit of understanding of form from each pot. And, we want to keep it brisk. We don't want to labor our work. We want to be accurate and thoughtful. And, don't overwork the clay, because the clay just starts getting, oops, she said, the clay starts getting a little tired if you overwork it. Okay, so let's see how a 1 pound pot compares to a 1.5 pound pot. Here is 1 pound. Here is a 1.5 pounds. And here's a very stuck 1.25 pounds. So I hope you can see there's slight variations in volume and general size. So I'm going to let one of my bowls dry out a little. I'm going to let these cups dry, and next film is going to be putting handles on these cups and finishing trimming. See you soon.